How to Create a Glitch Monologues Season 33 Chapter 6. This is Season 33 of How to Create a Glitch in the Matrix Monologues Episode 6. In this episode, we will be talking about the arrangement of one's non-consensuality and its structure. Now, if we can draw any lesson from the ideas set out in this season, it is that our consensuality finds its limit when the authority of the state to impose a conjoined consensuality excludes it. But the manner of that exclusion produces a multiplicitous expression. That is to say, that at the limits of our consensuality, where it reaches the non-consensual action of the state, it possesses a many-tiered potentiality, a bifurcated set of layers, which entails the reactive emotionality of agents of the state to the delayed shadow parts of our being. Or, to put it another way, our minds generate reactive impulses to what is going on around us, which we suppress into our shadow self over time. These shadow impulses penetrate our consensuality, but find dialectical reaction in the non-consensual action of the state, tiered according to the time delay since their inception within the mind. Let me give you an example. Suppose you are thinking about whether or not you support NATO's military alliance with Ukraine. Consciously, you maintain the position that Ukraine is justified in its self-defense, which should be facilitated by NATO. This point is justified in your mind by the sheer audacity of Ukraine's resistance. Given that you believe in the principle of self-determination of peoples, you think that it makes sense for NATO to assist Ukraine in their defense. But beneath the surface consensuality, let's say that you have some sympathy with some aspects of Russia's justification for the war, namely the fact that NATO has been expanding eastward towards Russian territory for decades. Suppose you have some unconscious impulse toward a resolution, a suggestion, mere incipient, not fully thought out, but this thought or impulse invades your consciousness, at the edge of your perception. You repress it, because you agree with the defense of Ukraine. But a part of you clearly sees the need for a resolution. You go on about your day. Then, 16 hours later, you encounter an agent of the state. They express to you some contextual meaning. But part and parcel with this contextual meaning is a higher-level response to your thoughts about Ukraine. The nature of this response is fundamentally dialectical. That is, the author of them has assumed that you are fully in agreement with Russia, which you never consciously expressed. This manifestation or bifurcation of dual narratives represents the integration of your action over a period of some 24 hours in relation to impulses you didn't even know that you had, consciously. Suppose additionally, you also thought in the past 36 hours about an up-and-coming piece of legislation. Again, these thoughts are not consciously held. But non-consensually, you oppose the legislation. Again, the agent of the state manifests another bifurcation of their expression, another layer, wherein they dialectically assume you are against the legislation and enunciate why you are wrong. These layers, overlaid upon the expression of the agent of the state, represent their unconscious responses to your non-consensual impulses. But they phrase the lower, somewhat perceptible meaning expressed contextually, and so on and so forth. Thus, all impulses which can generate reactive dialectical positions, supported by the authority of the polity, generate reactive emotionality which manifests in a way which is multi-layered. Each expressive level corresponds to a time delay, manifesting according to the plate of the hands, posture, voice and face. If we are to understand this multi-tiered property of our expressive action, we must first accept that when we express contextual meaning, there is higher meaning expressed in the moment, which is more responsive to the internal impulses that others repress, but which find their dialectical opposite in our intentional action. But the agents of the state, through their power to effectuate the conjoined consensuality, possess the ability to undermine the joining of our non-consensuality with the conjoined space. In other words, what we view as the contextual determination of, say, a court, has more to do in its expression with the higher integration or lack of integration of our non-consensual impulses. The structure of the event represents a manifold set of layers, each nested in the one above, shaping the contextual through the phrasing of the higher. In other words, If, let's say, you were to have a number of policy dialectical non-consensual impulses immediately prior to intersecting with an arbiter of the state, you will find their contextual meaning tailored to their rebuke of your unconscious shadow self. In other words, judicial decisions are indeed biased, in the sense that every conjoining consensuality of the state is a referendum on your unconscious views. Even if you do not subscribe to these impulses consciously, they play a role in the decision-making of the state, because if the arbiter accedes to your contextual response, they would be loosening those impulses within the state. So, in other words, your shadow self is the body of your non-consensuality, the primer, which either antagonistically, dialectically generates its opposition in the expression of the agents of the state, or it forms the bedrock of a conjoined space, when those non-consensual impulses are reflected in the policy of the government. It is important to be mindful of one's unconscious sympathies and impulses, because they will govern the outcome of one's contextual exchange of meaning through interaction with one's non-consensuality. This pattern likewise is reflected in the manifestation of one's shadow self through the subjective components of one's observations of the other. Underlying both manifestations is the all-in-all principle, through which some limited degree of God consciousness animates us all, some unity, which often can only be interpreted through the higher-level expressions we give off in the moment of conversation. That's the end of the podcast for today. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment and subscribe.